Thank you very much for joining us, Prins.
Thank you.
So let's start off with your career journey. How did you get into the IT sector, and where have you been?
Sure. So my sort of journey began in the Northern Territory, Darwin. I grew up in Darwin and Nhulunbuy. Went down to Sydney Uni in 1980 to study electrical engineering. Certainly got amoured with computing, even though computing in those days was with punch cards.
Right.
And so started down that journey. I was a indentured engineer, so went back up to the Territory during holidays and so forth. And interestingly, worked a fair bit on the different Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander communities during those periods, providing engineering services in terms of both whether it was electrical, sewerage, any of the various aspects of the services. And during one of those breaks, got involved with the what was then the Darwin Community College, and got offered a role in information technology, or computing as it was in those days, and decided that actually this IT stuff paid a whole lot better in those days than engineering did. So jumped into that pretty quickly. And interestingly, there weren't any roadmaps in those days, so we did everything from networking, which was pulling wires.
Yep.
In those days, from the main compute centre, which was really a demountable with a few PDPs, 11s in there with what looked like discs and so forth, which were look very much like a washing machine.
Sure.
And we'd have to do the backups and so forth on those, and so that was my entry into computing. I went on then to finish a Bachelor of Business Computing up there, and got involved with the university. Was a member of the Higher Education Council up there. And it was a transitioning organisation in the sense that it went from Darwin Community College to Darwin Institute of Technology and Northern Territory University.
Right.
I spent best part of 13 years with the organisation as it transitioned through those different phases, and my involvement really grew up with the organisation, and we went very much from like I said, a demountable with lots of different bits and pieces of equipment to a compute centre, and went from staff of about 6 people when I first started, through to when I ended. I think we had about 60 people in the information technology group, and that was quite a large group then in those days. So that building block, I guess, was pretty significant. But one of the things that I realised pretty early on was needed to have a commercial brain. So kept studying, and did both my accounting and law degrees with the institution up there, and then went off into law and technology law, but taking the commercial bent, which was that we very much worked in the capital markets. Joined Clayton Utz as a partner after having done my articles with the solicitor for the Northern Territory, and went deep into technology law, but listings of organisations and so forth.
Yeah.
But prior to that, set up a technology incubator up in the Territory, first technology incubator, which we partnered with several different universities, including Tsinghua University, China's leading university, to set up this organisation, and did that. And I also set up a consulting group which we listed on the ACS, and took that all the way through to then challenging some of the largest computing consulting firms.
Yeah.
In terms of, we went for in those days, which would have been one of the largest IT contracts in terms of a $300 million contract at that stage, and we beat IBM and EDS and a number of the other larger providers in that process. So that was my introduction to computing. In terms of the university sector, we in the Territory there, we did the first lot of online enrolments and developed that. So as you can imagine, when we went from punch cards to digital technology, and then to doing online enrolments and so forth, they were big, significant jumps, and from a networking point of view, from pulling cables through to setting up Wi-Fi networks and so forth. Very significant, lots of changes. Wasn't just in the Territory either. Cooperatively, in those days, ARNet was a big research network, which formed the backbone of what was then the Australian networks.
That's right.
And we were the node, and we had some interesting interactions with Defence and other organisations in that space, and so we collaboratively with 12 other universities actually set up a whole series of different administrative systems and so forth, and worked very cooperatively with lots of the bigger players in terms of whether it was IBM or Microsoft or whoever, in terms of developing and deploying those systems.
Yep.
So that was my introduction, but the remoteness had its challenges, but it was also very fertile in the sense that there weren't any boundaries. Certainly, it was. I did everything from pulling wires to doing the backups, to writing code in COBOL, but also doing curriculum development in that space, and so it was very rewarding and fantastic introduction to the world of computing.
Yeah, and of course the nascent internet, with ARNet being the predecessor to what we have today. I remember that period where the commercial providers started coming in, and the complexities that arose at the time.
I mean, certainly the universities through ARNet and the connectivity. We had connectivity to the world when commercial entities and the rest of the country didn't have any of that. So it was a very special time in terms of how quickly Australia in particular embraced technology and drove it at such speed. No, that's quite a story there. So how did you get involved in ACS? So ACS was about 1989. I became the chair of the Northern Territory branch of the ACS.
Right.
And it was it was a mixture of, we had people from the Defence Forces and research and the university, plus the Northern Territory Compute Office in terms of the administration, which was really, in those days, had been driven a lot by the Commonwealth Government, setting up a compute centre up there.
Yep.
But then, so all of those people, it was a community of about 400 plus people. So quite a significant number of people in those days,
yes.
Particularly from a professional point of view. So that was my involvement started at that stage in terms of 1989, and then for 2 decades hence I spent a lot of time with the ACS and with the bodies, with the international bodies. So not only the Australian Computer Society, but also the Southeast Asian Regional Computer Confederation, and the International Federation of Information Processing, IFIP. So with all of those organisations, I was very much involved. So from 1989 onwards, I was a counsellor with the ACS, all the way through to, I think, from memory, probably 2005, when I finished up on the ACS Council. But over that period of time, the developments, computing developments were significant, but so were the, from a profession point of view, it was about 1996. I was a vice president by that stage, and I led a review of the ACS in terms of looking to see how we could change the ACS from being, I guess, a grouping of people who are interested in the profession and information technology, to really looking to see how it could be turned into a profession, such as the accounting profession, or the legal profession, or any of the other professions. So. It was a significant review, not just a structural review. It was with the intent of building the body of knowledge, getting the curriculum, getting it all set up in order for us to be recognised as a profession. So that was in 96. Pushed that pretty significant and pretty hard, and we got it through, and we were recognised by the Australian Council of Professions as a profession, and that then led to us being able to not only do the things that we do now, we'd probably take for granted that we can we can accredit courses. We do all of the overseas processing of, so for example, we set that whole process up of doing the overseas processing of qualifications. Prior to that, and prior to the professions, there wasn't any of that. Similarly, in terms of the accreditation with universities, those early days in terms of the courses, the engineers would would try and impede or try and engage us in those processes. And there are a lot of courses that were accredited by the engineers, and there were discussions in those early days, cooperative discussions with the engineers about whether we should be a fused profession with the engineers. And as I said, my background was through there. But one of the things that I did recognise is that I'm a fellow of the CPAs. I became a CPA, took it right the way through to the fellowship there. Same with the Australian Institute of Company Directors, fellow there. And with my law, I'd still hold an unrestricted practicing certificate, because those, from a profession point of view, so my first profession was with the ACS with IT, but also had all of the other professions, and so that was a really big turning point for the ACS. And being vice president at that stage, I went on to be the president, and the presidency was an interesting point because at that point in time, Y2K was the issue.
Yep.
So Y2K 96 did the stuff. Got through the professions, and just after we got recognised as by the Council of Professions, and in there, we then had to deal with Y2K.
Yes,
and not only in Australia, but obviously worldwide.
Yeah,
and at the same time, I got the presidency of the Southeast Asian Regional Computer Confederation as well. So we had about 500,000 professionals in Southeast Asia looking for direction.
All focused on this.
And same in terms of Australia. We had about 40,000 at that stage, so we had the 40,000 and the 500,000, and we were sort of interleaving with IFIP in terms of the world and how we approached it. So that was a pretty significant and engaging process, because from the Australian community and government's point of view, it was a big deal.
Yes.
And whether the planes would fall out of the sky, or whether things would, and so the guidance that we gave was significant. We took the opportunity at that stage to engage the government in significant advocacy around being a knowledge nation. And at the same time, I started writing columns in the Australian and so forth around making sure, from an advocacy point of view, that we were not only a profession but also being an advocate and a player in the process of engaging the government and the policy drivers, but also the community in terms of what the expectation is and where we should position ourselves in the world from a knowledge nation point of view. Looking back on that 25 years hence, and we'll talk a bit about that, I'm sure, in a little while, but we were at a significant peak at that point in time in terms of engaging government from a policy point of view, curriculum point of view, and various other forums, which gave us great entry into shaping, I guess, that from that sort of 2000 to probably 2015, there was a significant positioning for the ACS to drive a lot of that forward.
What would you say were some of the successes in that period?
For
the advocacy and moving ACS forward?
Certainly from an advocacy point of view, curriculum development. So, for example, I was on the Council of Australian Governments put me on the National Vocational Education Council. So, there was, we developed curriculum, certainly that looked at, in those days, equity. And my work, for example, with IFIP was all about equity.
Right.
In terms of both CIARC and IFIP, my drive there was around the digital divide as it was emerging at that stage. It was, how do we get, make sure that we don't segregate the world into people who have and have not. Did lots of travel in terms of visiting various countries, engaging those politicians and so forth about the need to not only develop their skills, but also to develop the communities so that they were engaged properly in the ubiquitous nature of what technology would become, and that they needed the access, they needed the education to do that.
Yeah.
And it sounds pretty pat now.
Yeah.
But at that stage, there wasn't internet, there wasn't the social media, there wasn't any of these things that would make and deliver and drive that.
Yeah.
So at that stage, it was a lot about, for example, with IFIP and CIARC, we set up the World Computer Congress conferences. And so I was a vice president of IFIP and the director of publications. So one of my big roles there was to make sure, and over about a 10-year period that I was director of publications there, we published something like 260 proceedings of the World Computer Congresses.
Right.
So those proceedings had the latest thinking, the presentations from all the academics, and what was significant was that was shared and available to everybody. So it wasn't just this particular group of individuals who had the development and had the advancement, and that was it. This was shared right across. We set up in that time a digital library so that all of this would then be available through ARNet and so forth to everybody. So from spreading the development and the word, that was a significant development, but also from a social good point of view, that created a platform that meant that what we take for granted now, that you can develop something and then make it available to the rest of the world, or it gets made available to the rest of the world. That was the genesis. That was the start of it. We did that originally in paper form, and then moved it to a digital library and pushed out. That knowledge was then made available to the whole world.
Right.
And the sort of forward thinking that knowledge, we talked about the knowledge economy, but really how do you create it without creating the haves and the have-nots? You've got India, you've got Taiwan, you've got all these different countries, and the World Computer Congress went to China.
Right.
And at that stage, the developments were very early. Now they're very advanced in all of those different areas, but we were in there driving that, making those changes, being very, for example, in terms of the Chinese World Computer Congress, the interaction in terms of trying to get the publications in the languages and to make it available was very challenging.
Which year was that?
God. You got me.
I think
it was in the 90s.
Right, so very early in that.
It was late 90s. So
so very rudimentary, I'd imagine, in China at that stage.
So we went to Beijing, and it was incredible. But those were sort of the intimate sort of drivers, and they were the building blocks from both a profession, but more importantly from a social aspect point of view, to make sure that that digital divide didn't get created then. And the interesting thing is we're probably again at that inflection point with AI, because even in those early days with the developments that we were looking at from in machine learning point of view, as well as some of the sort of genesis of the AI, it was still very much fearful that we would create that digital divide.
Yes.
With AI now, there is again that challenge, whether we will create or the opportunity, if not taken right across and the developments made ubiquitous and available.
Yeah.
Challenge is that there could be that again.
No, very much so. And as you say, this is a big challenge with the rollout of AI as we're seeing it at the moment. Yeah. So what's your feeling about where the future holds for this?
When you say future, are you talking about the ACS or technology?
Well, let's start with the technology sector and Australia's role in it.
Because I think from a technology point of view, there's great opportunity. Different sectors we lead in, and we need to take the opportunities and lead those out. So, for example, I'm a director of PowerLink.
Yes.
So from a renewables and an energy transition point of view, which happens to be, I guess, where a significant amount of focus and concentration, whether it's hydrogen production, nuclear, any of these things, Australia has the opportunity because of our entry into that area to be a leader. And the technology leadership there is significant. But for us to actually exploit that and to drive it out, we need to be focused and we need to take that through. That's a particular area, whether it's grid stabilisation, whether it's how we deal with batteries, how we optimise the use of energy. All of those aspects are significantly important, because this will be a repeating theme that I have is equity and how we use it, technology. Because I went away from technology for technology's sake to its application and how it delivers social good and how it can create the way for that customer and the customer experience to be the best that it can be. So from that point of view, when we're looking at what's the opportunity for Australia, it is absolutely where we lead in certain defence technologies. So, for example, in Townsville, we set up Spark, which was a simulation for lots of different things, whether it's emergency, defence. So those simulation technologies and so forth, and setting up a defence industry hub up there was a significant opportunity, because you've got the Americans and a plethora of other defence interests, including Singapore and so forth there, and the opportunity is there for us to build a significant defence technology industry hub, and that's up there. We set up the Lansdowne Eco-Industrial Renewables Hub again. Those sorts of things where you combine both the technology, the resources, and industries of the future, you then create jobs that have lasting value. I think the ACS research has indicated, that maybe 50% of the jobs that are now here that we take for granted will disappear.
Yeah.
And that's not a new thing.
That's right.
Because if I go back to the 1990s, the predictions that we had then have now manifested.
Right. Yeah.
Having said that, the world hasn't stopped turning.
Exactly.
But what we do need to do is to proactively, both from a country point of view, but also from a profession point of view, make sure that we set it up so that we have the knowledge. We make sure that we're solutions focused. So, from an industry point of view, where our strengths are, really drive those strengths from both the end product point of view, but also from the technology point of view that enables that to be there.
Yeah.
And we're so good at that stuff, but what we're not good at is commercialisation of it and taking hold of the end product and getting value from it. So we invent a whole, lots of things, and we're good at starting stuff, but we're not good at commercialisation and then exploitation of it for the benefit of everybody.
Yeah.
So, from what that does is give us the edge in terms of we from an ACS point of view need to be very up and in the policy engagement point of view and the advocacy point of view in terms of driving that.
Yes.
So advocating around how we do the technology and the exploitation of that to create those new industries, to create those lasting knowledge hubs, if you like, that'll drive us and position Australia well into the next century. That how do you do that? Industry partnerships with universities. I think we started a number of those things. I've sort of indicated, for example, back in the 90s when we set up ICT incubators.
Yeah.
And they produced some stuff, they didn't produce other things and so forth. But those are the sorts of things that we do need to keep doing. But the industry partnerships where we're leaders in terms of resource, agriculture, defence, renewables, for example, just to name a few, then those are things that we need to focus our politicians and our advocacy and resource them. Make sure that we partner with the industry and have viable partnerships with universities into that sector so that we can commercialise it. The part of then the drive to why we need to do it is the digital inclusion and the equity.
Yes.
A lot of my work spent related to you that last 5 years spent up in Townsville. So part of that was that I was went up there to do the COVID recovery. I was the head of the COVID recovery task force in terms of social, economic, and health recovery.
Yes.
And did a whole lot of infrastructure work and so forth, and developed up an economic case that saw $34.5 billion worth of projects into that region. Townsville, interestingly, is the largest population centre north of Sydney, north of Brisbane, and north of Perth.
Yeah.
So when you think about the mass of Australia, it's a huge part. But then there are lots of other smaller communities that are in that footprint. So from a digital inclusion point of view, when you say, well, you can't get mobile coverage in a lot of the smaller communities.
Yes.
So how are they excluded then from participating in what we take for granted in a city like Brisbane or Sydney or elsewhere?
Yeah.
So whatever we do from an advocacy point of view, we need to make sure that we have that.
Yeah.
Need to advocate more around knowledge development, university courses, and how we use and deploy technology, and making it so that the change resistance isn't there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there, but also then from both an ACS point of view and from from an Australian point of view, international collaboration needs to keep going, and keep going at pace, because for us to play in this arena, one of the things, for example, for me was to be president of CARC and the ACS, and to play a significant role in IFIP, meant that we were bringing knowledge, but we were bringing advocacy, but we were engaging the world in what it was from a technological point of view, but more importantly from a social change point of view,
yes,
that we would influence and drive. And so from that aspect, we need to keep going. And there's a great propensity at this stage, again, that inflection point, and it was similar in the 90s, where you could have gone isolationist.
Right.
President Trump and what's happening in America at the moment, you could say, well, there is a bit of isolationism there. From a social point of view and from a technology point of view, and driving the world, I guess GDP overall.
Yeah.
The benefits got to be that we do it collaboratively and drive that through.
Yeah.
And I think underpinning all of this is, from a profession point of view, is the professional ethics and the purpose of why we're doing things, and our ethics.
Yeah.
Whenever, whether it's from a profession point of view, or what we're doing technologically, that's got to be the backdrop for what happens.
Yeah.
When we're deploying AI, when we're looking at how we deal with equity across a number of different things, or when we're developing up solutions, it's got to be at the forefront. Because if we're not there, and if we're not for purpose, and a lot of my career, I guess, since leaving technology pure, has been around with working with for-purpose organisations. So a lot of it has been in employment services, human services, so health, community development, these aspects, and I've worked as a CEO for over 15 years in that sector, and a lot of that was looking at how it is that we do things in large scale to get people employed. So, for example, in terms of the employment sector, with the organisations that I've worked, we've got over 1 million people who are long-term unemployed into work.
Yeah.
That's so from a purpose point of view, that's been significant. Did we use technology? Absolutely. we deployed technology in order to help those people into work, and that changed their lives and their families' lives and the communities that they lived in, because they were long-term unemployed.
Right. No, that's and that's an interesting point you make with the for-purpose organisations. That that's something I think that we'd like to consider ourselves being at ACS as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's your advice to somebody entering the industry and looking for a storied career of your own?
Yeah. So for me, if you look at my career, the start of it was around multidisciplinary learning.
Right.
And I'm not decrying anybody who chooses to be in one profession. For me, to be productive, for example, in human services and community development and government, the range of skills and I guess learning that I've had has stood me in good stead.
Yeah.
So my encouragement to anybody is, and everybody, is to certainly start with education and then continue that over a lifetime.
Yeah.
So for me, it was starting in engineering, going to a Doctor of Juridical Science, and juridical science is about how the laws are set up for our societies.
Right.
How we create those laws and methodologies. So one is mathematics and physics and technology, all the way through to the other aspect, which is social cohesion, how you develop a system of laws so that governance actually works. And so for me, having worked in that range of different occupations, capital markets was a hoot. Doing listings and doing law around that was interesting. But when I have a look at the range of different things, if I say, look, I was the CEO of the largest community outside the large population centres, and probably one of the largest government entities in any form, because it just means that the focus then comes on people, delivering services to them, and how you deal with people and deliver those services is what, at the end of the day, what it's all about.
Absolutely.
So embracing multidisciplinary learnings and not if you want to be in a profession, no issue with that. However, keep learning. Focus on problem solving and not just technology is a big call out for me.
Right.
We can in our profession of being ICT technologists and so forth, sometimes get caught up in the beauty of the technology, and that's good. Yeah. However, it's got to be for purpose and for problem solving, in my view, and so the advice will be, think about what that looks like, and certainly the other part of that is then building resilience and adaptability. The world has changed significantly. Like for me, if I have a look at the profession and where things have gone. I was in capital markets and CEO when the global financial crisis came along and people said, this is going to be
the end of the world.
End of the world. Y2K, you then go through, for me, being the CEO when recovery from flood events, from natural cyclones, I guess I had a head start in terms of Cyclone Tracy in Darwin that survived that, but then a series of other natural disasters and working through those, and we've had COVID, and working through what that pandemic looks like. So there are going to be those what people call black swan events. They seem to be coming a little more regularly than a black swan.
We're getting a flock of them.
Yeah. But it's being resilient and being open to adaptability. So it's getting those skills and those experiences will stand you in good stead as you go through. I think the other part is open your eyes to the globe. Think global, act global has been one of my things, is that you can bring experiences and you can bring knowledge from outside in, and that again will stand you in good stead. So make sure that you have an expansive mindset, and that sort of refers back to the learning part. Continuous learning gives you that aspect. Leadership, I think, from a technology point of view, communications and leadership are paramount for young technologists. You need to be able to build those skills and those experiences that give you good communications grounding, so that you can engage a variety of different people. For me, it was as a technologist, from an engineering aspect, it was easy, because a lot of people didn't understand anything that you were talking about. So it was easy in that sense that they'd just go, "Oh, we'll just leave it to you." But that wasn't the case, because you needed to actually interact in order to indicate what the solution is, how it was going to change the way. So all of those different aspects, I think, from both communication point of view, but then how you lead in those circumstances. So take the opportunities to develop up the communications and the leadership aspects. And so that's through, whether that's through organisations, like for me, I did a whole lot of work and still do some work with organisations such as the PCYC, which is the Police Youth Clubs, Legacy in terms of defence. So those sorts of organisations, as well as the ACS, give you the opportunity to develop up those communications and those leadership skills, which will stand you in good stead in terms of going forward. And I think the staying connected to professional bodies is a very important part of that learning journey, but also then gives you that edge in terms of knowledge, experience, opportunities to grow and to develop. And then finally, touched on ethics and purpose, and I think from a young person's point of view, need to understand what both of those mean to them, and develop up a story and a view of who they are, so that because that, at the end of the day, reputation's everything, and that reputation's built on your ethical framework and what it is that you stand for in terms of purpose.
Yeah.
So, for example, for me, lots of people ask me, why didn't you stay in technology? Because, you would have made a mozzo, or why didn't you stay in the law? Because, from a vertical. And I'd say to them, look, for me, sure, I led technology as a partner of national firms, CEO here in Australia and overseas and so forth. But for me, it's been about service to community.
Right.
I'll say, why'd you go to Townsville? Well, it is around how you serve your people, and what your purpose is, and for me, it's been about growing communities, serving people, and changing lives.
Yeah.
And sure, in technology, you can do that in a certain way. For me, it was really about having that purpose and being able to see and physically see how you can change people's lives.
Excellent. Well, on that note, and a very inspiring note, I very much thank you for your time today, Prins. That's been we've been over a lot there, and I'm sure we could go over a lot more, but thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.